Aloha and welcome to ThinkTech. We're raising public awareness about technology, energy, globalism, and diversification. As part of the ThinkTech series, today's show is called Global Connections, and I'm your host, Carlos Juarez. It gives me great pleasure today. I'm joined by Danika Menson and Megan Strausser. Both are graduate students here at Hawaii Pacific University, and in many respects, they represent sort of the new generation of young leaders coming up. They're global citizens in their own right, but we're going to have a fascinating story about what has brought them here, some of what they've done, and places in the world that they've seen. And I guess, as you'll see, it'll be a great opportunity to learn about some of the challenges, some of the excitement about the world that we're living in today. Today we're going to talk about these experiences they've had, what brought them here, and what they're doing. I just want to remind everybody that we do broadcast live on the internet at 2 and at 4 every weekday. All of our shows are streamed on ustream.tv as well as on Spreaker.com. If you want links to those, you can go to our website, thinktechhawaii.com. And if you'd like to join us here in the downtown studio gallery for any of our shows, just write to j@thinktechhawaii.com. So again, we're joined today by Danika Menson. And Danika, you come to us from Slovenia in Central Europe. And we've got also Megan Strausser, who's from Pennsylvania. So maybe if I can turn to you briefly, Danika, give us a quick snapshot. I mean, here you are in Honolulu, Hawaii, in the middle of the world, the center of the world. But tell us a little bit about where you're from. Slovenia, for some people, is often a place you have to kind of dig out the map and show them. But it's, of course, one of the newer members of the European Union, now entering almost a second decade, part of the former Yugoslavia.
Exactly. I always say just right next to Italy on the eastern Italian border. But yeah, it's a really small country, 2 million people, beautiful, picturesque country, mountain sea, we have everything. It's basically, it's a very nice and calm place, even calmer than Hawaii. Yeah, what I find fascinating, I've been privileged to visit many times, and much like our own state of here in Hawaii, it has a beautiful natural environment. The Alps in the north, part of the Adriatic Sea on the west side, beautiful rolling hills, and just a lot of forestry as well, in a relatively small place. So fascinating, and so again, the puzzle is, how did you find yourself suddenly in this part of the world, the other side of the planet completely from Slovenia? Yeah. Actually, it's partly thanks to you and the first exchange students that came to Hawaii from University of Ljubljana, which is Manza, my friend. She came here for a semester, ended up staying forever, and I came to visit her the first time. And I kind of liked what she was telling me about the dynamic that's going on in the classroom, the dynamic of the school. So I decided I'm going to try studying here. I said I'm going to go for an exchange first to see if I actually really like it, and I decided to stay, and I decided to transfer.
Yeah, and I think as we'll continue talking, I mean, one of the challenges, no, not a challenge, let me rephrase that, but one of the realities, when you leave, what you know, your comfort zone, your home, your world is never quite the same. And you made a long venture, but obviously you'll never quite be the same person. And I think the same can be said, Megan, about yourself. You come from Pennsylvania, but at some point you decided to get on a plane or a train or something that brought you all the way out here. So tell us a little bit about your background.
I actually don't have that much different of a story than Danika. My school that I initially started graduate school at in Philadelphia, Arcadia University, they started working with HPU's DMS program, and they had set up kind of a study away semester for us here to earn a certificate and count towards our degree back in Philadelphia. And when I got here and started talking and taking classes to the different professors and in the program, I realized that it was a much better fit for me. So I made the transfer here as well.
Yeah, and so you came to, I'm just always curious, I mean, before you ever came to Hawaii, what were some of the images or stereotypes that you would have had? I mean, you didn't imagine yourself suddenly, probably thought, oh, a little short vacation, and now you've got actually some very real substantive things happening. You've been able to pursue not just your studies, but, building networks and connections and really opening up new doors. What were some initial perceptions and maybe how different it's become since you've come?
It's when you hear as a tourist, like, first of all, you think of Hawaii, oh, just nice sandy beaches. There's nothing else than beach as far as the eye can see. But then you come here and you get into the groove, and you kind of realize that you have to go away from Waikiki and away from the tourism to experience what Hawaii actually really is. The reality is much more harsh than it's shown to the tourists. one of the major things I was really surprised about is the amount of homeless people here, because back home we just don't see that. We don't have that many homeless people, so that was my first.
Sure, a shock in a way, something that was not what you expected to see.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And what about yourself? What impressions could you share about what you thought Hawaii was like, and then when you finally have made yourself?
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest shock for most of us who come to visit is the fact that we're expecting, just beach time all the time and to be sunny and rainbows and island life. And then you get here and it's a city, like it's a real city. And I was going to school in Philadelphia, so I had a fairly experiential contact with the city kind of environment there. And I was surprised when I came here to have more of that, or even perhaps more visible poverty and homelessness here than what I even saw in a lot of places in Philadelphia.
Yeah, fascinating. And I go back to this thing I said earlier, how once you've kind of left the world that you might know, because you had an option to simply stay there, some of your own maybe friends or cousins or other people who may not venture as far away as you, it's much easier to kind of stay in that world. Once you've seen different parts of the world, your mindset changes, right? Could you reflect on that? I mean, how does it change the way you see the world?
I think you become very very critical about your own country. In particular, it's like, well, why should I stay here when I have different opportunities abroad, which is like I can get easier to the things I know I can do than back home, where everybody knows everybody, and there's a lot of, even if they will deny it if you ask them, there's a lot of connections. If you don't have connections, then you basically, especially now that Slovenia has been hit harshly by the economic crisis, it's hard to get a job. It's hard to you get a different perspective about everything, and all of a sudden everything seems smaller, and you get that wish to just go out. But there's always the one, I want to return because it's home.
I know, I mean, myself, because this is my home, of course, and yet I've lived in many places. I know often what I see and what I often tell people is that not only do you learn about the world that you went and saw, you came here, you've seen other areas, and we'll talk about some of your experiences in Asia and elsewhere, but you also then reflect more about your home. You said you're critical, and that's true, but on another level, you also begin to appreciate what you value, what you miss, or what you know is important in your own culture, right? What about yourself? I mean, how did it change you in terms of
my first experience with leaving home in that kind of significant capacity was actually as an undergraduate. My very first semester of college, I moved to Ireland and studied there for 4 months. And so not only was I leaving my parents' home to go to college, but I was going, across the Atlantic and going to Ireland and living there. And I was 18, fresh out of my parents' home. And I think that this idea of being critical about where you've come from, or at least have a little bit more of an understanding of how that fits into a broader scheme, really hit me then, because a couple stories, but one in particular, it was during the Bush administration, and he wasn't very popular abroad, as we all know. And so when I was abroad, they'd be like, "Oh, how could you have voted for him?" Da, 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 da. And I was like, I was 14 when he was elected. So it was just one of those things where, because I represented America, that's what I was.
I mean, in effect, you are a cultural ambassador, and like it or not, you're going to have to both explain, justify, clarify, and you really are put on the spot. And likewise, in your case, Danika, you're from Europe. Well, once you get through that, people will assume, well, you are European. You embody everything that means, and you obviously represent those interests. And yet Europe, even the EU today, 28 member states that are joined, a very wide variation among them, right? I wonder, the other thing that I think is fascinating and speaks a lot to both part of what attracted you and it has you here at the moment in Hawaii, you're both students in a program on diplomacy and military studies. And, we've said already the stereotype of Hawaii, this great, vacation and sun and surf and all that, and it certainly has that, no doubt. But we always remind others that Hawaii is also an interesting place that brings together people from many other areas, and whether it's studying international affairs or issues of diplomacy, military defense, these are important parts of our economy, of our livelihood here. What would you say a little bit about both the areas of study that you're doing, because you studied similar things before you came here, you studied them elsewhere. What is different about coming here and pursuing continued studies in those areas?
For me, I would say that just in general, I think it's the schooling system in the U.S. that you focus more on practical work more than on theory. Because in my undergrad, we went through all the theory that there ever was, so I have a good background in that. But here it was like more practical application, more practical cases like from history or current events, and also. Back home, we have a tiny, tiny military. Here, the presence of military it's shown. So just the focus on the military affairs, and also the presence of so many military personnel in our classes, it gives you like a completely different view that sometimes you just cannot comprehend. It's like, why would you do such things, or why would you think that way? But it helps you. You grow with it. You get to see different points of view.
Sure. Yeah. No, of course, part of it is that diversity of the classroom, because certainly from the world you might come from and maybe a more typical mainland American university, you tend to have a pretty homogeneous student body. Hawaii in general has attracted people from all over, and the programs you're in do that, and that helps to enrich, I think, what you described, the perspective there. What about yourself, Megan? What could you say about just coming to this place to study about these kinds of issues? How is it different?
I think that the fact that there is such a big military presence is a really good point. The master's program that I came from before, the emphasis was on grassroots, NGO sorts of things, and that's kind of the environment that we lived in Philadelphia, because there are a lot of organizations like that who focus on that kind of level. And then I came here, and with the defense environment that is here in the security industry, like it's much more policy oriented, much more state level, which is what initially attracted me in the first place, because that's kind of the career track I see myself in. So that was like perhaps the biggest shift from my experience back.
Yeah, no, I think it's an issue that, we had a few months ago, a lot of this scandal came out about the role of Edward Snowden and a contractor, and even our local media trying to explain to the larger national media, we actually have a defense and intelligence community here, and it's nothing new. It's been a long-standing part of this place, and it is again part of that role that Hawaii has, not just as this travel destination, but an important strategic center for our own military, with all that entails. I mean, it brings many different insights, many perspectives there. I wonder, one of the things as well I'd like us to talk a little bit about, and we'll continue the conversation in a moment, but you come and you're doing courses, and you described how maybe more practical on one hand, because we know, and certainly the best experience comes not just from learning in a classroom, but getting valuable outside experience, whether it's internships or jobs or just building networks, and otherwise travel. You described some travel you had done initially to Ireland, and then you had another experience while in college. Did you?
Yep, also an undergraduate. My focus was on globalization developments and human rights, and I had a keen interest in East Africa. So I chose to study abroad in Tanzania, which was a very unique experience. It's not kind of a typical place that people
very
stop off
out of your comfort zone, your more normal world, and this is again a good example where doing those kind of things, I mean, you'll never quite be the same person. Now you have an informed perspective and an insight into East Africa, into developing countries that obviously will shape how you see other things. Now we're going to continue on these. It's a fascinating topic we've just opened up, but we're going to take a short break first. And I'm Carlos Juarez. This is Global Connections in the ThinkTech radio series. We're talking here with Danika Menson and Megan Strausser about a wide range of global issues. We'll be back in just a short minute, so stay tuned for more of the story.
Aloha, I'm Nicole Horry for ThinkTech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone No. 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Horry. Mahalo.
Hi, this is Jay Fidel of ThinkTech. We have, 2 or 3 shows every afternoon during the business week that we stream live on Ustream, and we stream audio on Spreaker.com. Check it out. You can see the schedule on ThinkTechHawaii.com. One of the shows you should definitely see is Asia in Review. We do Asia in Review with David Day every Thursday afternoon between 4 and 5 p.m. Check it out on ThinkTechHawaii.com. Aloha. This is Jay Fidel.
I'm Bill Spencer, President of the Hawaii Venture Capital Association. We do monthly luncheon programs with ThinkTech about things that matter to Hawaii entrepreneurs, investors, and business service providers. So join us on the 4th Thursday of every month at the Plaza Club. For information about upcoming events or to join our mailing list, visit hvca.org. See you there.
Hi, I'm Donna Blanchard. I'm the host of the Arts in Hawaii on the ThinkTech series. I'm also the managing director of Kumukuhua Theater in beautiful downtown Honolulu at 46 Merchant Street. Right now we have an incredible show running called Will the Real Charlie Chan Please Stand Up? The Charlie Chan was based on a real-life detective right here in Chinatown, and Nancy P. Moss has written a wonderful script that Reiko Ho has done an excellent job of directing. It's running at Kumukuhua until September 22nd. You can find more information at kumukuhua.org. I hope to see you there. Aloha.
And we're back, we're live, and we're ThinkTech, and it's Global Connections in the ThinkTech radio series. We're talking about a range of global issues here with Danika Menson from Slovenia and Megan Strausser from Pennsylvania. And I just want to continue our dialogue. One of the things that I guess I wanted to kind of speak to, you've got, as graduate students, you're kind of doing coursework, you're researching and writing and doing all that exciting work, but you're also gaining very important experience outside of the classroom, a range of extra and co-curricular activities. I want to maybe speak briefly to what are some of the things that have been possible for you to do here and things that are really crucial for deepening your experience beyond just the classroom. Anything you could share?
Yeah, I've actually recently had quite a few good opportunities as far as furthering my experiential learning and knowledge. One of the biggest ones is the internship that I'm currently in. And I'm a research intern at Pacific Forum, and it actually gives me a lot of opportunity to learn more about Asia and the Asia Pacific region as a whole, which I was actually fairly unfamiliar with before coming to Hawaii. So that's been really integral to my growth process and my understanding of our field and how it works in a practical sense. And I've had some opportunities to go with them to different meetings and events and actually interact with some professionals, which is really unique, I think.
This is quite vital. And so these type of internship and otherwise experiential learning and Pacific Forum, an important partner even here of the ThinkTech series, help support our Asia in Review programs that are very similar, and it really underscores both the importance they do in terms of Asia policy, but I think even more than that, they really reach out to connect young leaders like yourself and others to kind of get that perspective. It is a world that's very serious policy, understanding Asia, and you've had opportunities, you've been able to now travel to Asia yourself and see more, and having these other experiences. You were in Ireland, you were in Tanzania, which are clearly different from your own Pennsylvania. Now you've had a chance to visit Taiwan, among other places. Think back for a moment about how, becoming the person you are. What do you make of that? Now you're becoming just even more global in your experiences.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm from a very small town in Pennsylvania, so it's really insular. We used to joke that it was a black hole. People just stayed there for their whole lives and they never left. And so a lot of times when I would say, oh, now I'm going to go Tanzania, or I have the chance to go to China. Some people would even be like, why? Why would you do that?
Why would you do that?
And I think that at first it was a curiosity and kind of this passion for learning and passion for traveling. And then you get the bug and you just want to go everywhere. But at this point, reflecting back on it, I think that it's given me such opportunities to grow my own understanding of the world and how I want to operate, in the future, especially in the career sense. I do want to get in the policy sides of things. And I don't think that I would have had that same desire, if I hadn't gone to all of these different places abroad and seen how they interact with me as an American and the other different kinds of conditions, in the developing world or in the Asian world, which is different, I think, than the other places I've been to.
And certainly a place like Taiwan, very dynamic and fast-paced, and it's fascinating. And even from here in Hawaii, we tend to have clearly, obviously, an understandable Asia focus and orientation, and that differs from many other parts of the U.S. mainland. We're hearing this talk, the pivot to Asia. Well, in some ways, we've always been there. If anything, it's just reaffirming what we do here. Tell us yourself, Danika. I mean, what type of extracurricular or co-curricular or otherwise outside of the classroom type activities have you been doing?
I also had an internship over the summer, but I was more in the private sector, so I worked for a private contractor, which also gave me the opportunity to travel. I went to Manila, Philippines, and I was a part of an international conference, and it actually a workshop, which gave me a lot of insight on just how things are done on the policy level and how they get developed, which was very interesting because so a lot of people probably imagine it's like some higher politics, but when you're there, it's basically very simple and logical.
And people to people, and people that have to come together for this, and even just always fascinating to see how do people put on a conference, what attention to detail or not, or the chaos, and then coming from relatively quiet and peaceful and small Slovenia to, I would imagine, Manila, this megalopolis, city in the Philippines, must have been quite eye-opening. Yes.
People everywhere. No, because back home I also come from a probably smaller place than you do, and the same mentality. Like, why would you stay home? You have a house. Your parents can be.
Yes.
But then going to such a different place, it's. I think every time I travel someplace, it's a culture shock for the first couple of days, but then you get to know the people, and it's I don't know. I like Manila. It's very vibrant. But people were extremely friendly.
Yes. No, that's right. And what's fascinating in your own opportunities to travel, particularly into Africa, I mean, there's often these very, myths and stereotypes that people are poor, underdeveloped, lazy, or what is it. In fact, it's often the opposite. There's some of the most dynamic things happening, or at the very grassroots, people who live in difficult conditions or injustice or just, a tough life, who make something out of it, who have actually dignity and pride in what they do, and otherwise, can actually be quite happy under circumstances that others might say, how could this be? But it makes you rethink your own values, I think. And you've described similarly the importance of these, building connections. I think that's what a lot of it is about. The world that we're living in now requires us to have these links. And I'm curious from either of you, if you can share with me, I mean, you often have this question, different parts of the world, different cultures are different, but yet on another level, people share some fundamental ideas and values. And whether you're at a conference in the Philippines or in Africa or Ireland, what would you say to that? Or do people share some fundamental, basic values that we're all similar, or do you see more of those differences and we tend to handle things in very different ways? How would you answer?
I don't know. I think in my experience, especially in small groups, one-on-one, when you're meeting people, it's not how different you are, from Tanzania than me from America. It's like we become friends, fast friends, and we exchange information. Being able to speak a couple languages, you end up having these conversations in 3 languages at the same time, and share about your family and your work, and it's. I think the dynamic between individuals is the same. Wherever I've gone, you gather around a table, you eat a lot of food, and you go dancing or something like that, and
sing karaoke.
And ultimately, I mean, a lot of what does go on, and particularly in the kind of world that you're describing, is a little more of this people-to-people, or almost like a citizen diplomacy. You have a lot of the formal things, and obviously countries and people have these important meetings and processes, but at the end of the day, it's really people talking to other people and kind of bridging different issues, solving some common challenges. Danika, what could you say about this question? Again, do you think people are inherently similar, or are there clear differences? And I speak to you, obviously, as a European. I mean, on one hand, you have this deep level of integration today in Europe, and your country is very much immersed into this EU, and yet there's even a resistance in some places. You don't want to be so homogenized. What makes you different from other places?
I would put as a perfect example here Greece, because I worked in Greece for 4 months, and it was in some aspects, like a bigger culture shock than coming to the U.S. because it's, but primarily, you're there to work together, and I think people who travel around a lot and they see connections. They don't try to seek, divides and trying to argue about stuff. It's always about, connecting. I've rarely came across people who would be like, oh, no, you're from Slovenia, go away.
Yeah.
Even we have this rivalry with Croatia, which is silly, but everybody has rivalries with countries.
Yeah.
But then you meet anywhere else outside, your countries, and you're like buddies, like this, because it's like, oh, we used to be one country.
Yeah, you find that commonality. So you may have personal differences, and I think it's fascinating how you described it there. Sometimes when you meet someone outside, you've got a common bond, a common experience and whatnot, and then even a shared history that at one time for many, many decades, and yet I think one of the tragedies that particularly unfolds in the breakup of Yugoslavia is that here's a people's diverse and religion and all, but somehow coexisted. And then some pretty ugly aspects of nationalism asserting itself when it didn't have to be that way, and it wasn't that way. And yet, again, back to this individual level, sort of people-to-people citizen diplomacy, I think we have ways to overcome that. Often it's maybe either certain leaders or certain people that are taking advantage of things to push a harder agenda.
Yeah, but I also think that, like as you said, in the case of Yugoslavia, the people making the most problem now are the younger generations that never experienced that life with your brothers from Yugoslavia, and they have some of them, not everybody, but you find somebody who has like pretty radical views that wants to start something, but it's, as my parents always told, no, we were one, we are all brothers. So
no, I mean, and this is the reality of so many different entities. Today, you're part of this bigger club of the EU. You come from Pennsylvania, and yet you're an American, and there you might find yourself in Tanzania or in the Philippines or Taiwan, and you find other Americans. You have a common bond. You have something that connects you with them, and yet you've got clear differences from your town, from your state, etc. As we continue, I mean, one of the things that I want to also speak to, you've had opportunities most recently right now in participating in a fascinating multilateral conference, and when we resume in a few more minutes, I want us to look at that, and specifically a set of student volunteers that have supported the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum. The APEC Forum has a conference that's unfolding right now in Hawaii on telecommunications and information. Very technical issues, but more than that, it's really again an example of this sort of multilateralism that goes on, and it speaks to the kind of issues we've talked about. What are the connections? What are the ways people come together? And so when we take a short break here in a minute, I want us to come back to look at that. Mainly just to, I think it weaves well into our overall theme. This is a program on global connections, and you are all giving us examples of this. So what you've done is open your lives to come far away, and having come here now, continually building those links and those connections. That's the key, and that's the world that we're part of, that's very deeply interdependent and quite fascinating. The technologies, even the technologies that bring people watching us here live or on the internet, really help inform us to give us that well-rounded perspective. So what I'd like to do right now, I want to take another short break. I'm Carlos Juarez. This is Global Connections on the ThinkTech radio series, and we're going to be continuing our conversation with Danika Menson, who joins us from far away little Slovenia, which is in many ways the new Europe, but also the old Europe. A very interesting paradox. We're also joined by Megan Strausser, who comes from Pennsylvania, a big state that is on our east coast there. And we're talking about a range of global issues, global connections, and I think a good illustration of how your stories tell us, the challenges and the opportunities that are out there. So we'll be back in just another short minute. Please stay tuned for more on this story. Thank you.
I'm Bill Spencer, president of the Hawaii Venture Capital Association. We do monthly luncheon programs with ThinkTech about things that matter to Hawaii entrepreneurs, investors, and business service providers. So join us on the fourth Thursday of every month at the Plaza Club. For information about upcoming events or to join our mailing list, visit hvca.org. See you there.
And we're back, and we're live, and we're ThinkTech, and this is Global Connections in the ThinkTech radio series. I'm your host, Carlos Juarez, and joined here today by Danika Menson from Slovenia and Megan Strausser from Pennsylvania. And, just a minute ago we were talking about, these connections that you've all been able to foster, and one of the fascinating ones, I'd like to ask you to share some reflections, some remarks. You've been able to participate as volunteers to help support this conference that's happening. It's a little bit under the radar, but I think it speaks to the nature of this conference. It's a working group of APEC, this important intergovernmental organization that brings together nations from from Asia, the Pacific, and even parts of Latin America. And the specific working group is on telecommunications and information. So again, very technical, but it represents the kind of world that we see more and more. This multilateralism, countries coming together to address their issues. And could you maybe just give us a quick snapshot? You've gotten briefings initially, and now you've been able to participate directly. What are some of the things that you've seen, or what do you come away with? Any takeaways? You could start, Danika.
I think it's interesting. Just Megan and I were more on the organizing side to organize all the volunteers, and it's interesting how our volunteers are by themselves already very different in how they react to the tasks assigned to them. Some of them are more open; they're willing to share more, try more. Others are more reserved; they're not so sure in themselves. But then from the delegate side, it's something similar than I saw in the Philippines. They're very friendly with each other. It's not like, the whole Pacific region is here, and then there's no animosities between anybody. It's a very, very nice, warm working environment.
Yeah, and I think with the way you described it there, part of what your role in helping organize the volunteers is really seeing the group dynamics and the challenge as a leader of trying to motivate others, get people to do this or that, and the way you described it, I could just imagine certain people stepping up, quick learners ready to do that, others that you've got to challenge, I think, of any kind of leaders to kind of figure out what is the right fit for the right people. Tell us about your experience. Again, we'll look in more depth, but you've had a chance now to spend a few days observing this conference.
Yeah, I actually wasn't entirely sure what I expected out of the multilateral aspect of it. But I think something that I'm finding between PEC Forum and working with APEC now is how multilateralism is a little different in Asia than it seems to be in Europe and in the Western kind of world in general. There is this, they all know each other, so there's this very warm environment, like Danika was saying, but then ultimately, especially in regards to APEC, they're not actually writing any policy or instituting anything. It's more of a like information sharing and best practices kind of thing. And then something that's really important in Asia that I'm finding is the sovereignty issue. So ultimately, even if they're sharing a lot of this information, kind of agreeing on certain things, when it comes down to it, they're not going to overstep any boundaries in terms of sovereignty in the different countries. And I think that with the EU and the UN, you see a little bit more like you need to abide by these regulations that we've just set up and that sort of thing. And so I think the dynamic is different in Asia. And my experience with the U.S. involvement in that is we are more accustomed to and comfortable with the Western kind of way of dealing with it. So sometimes I think that we're trying to go about the same thing in Asia. It doesn't quite work.
Yeah, no, but those are great remarks. And I think, again, it's, this particular organization, as I mentioned, APEC, it is a forum. Formally, that's the title. And really what it speaks to is how they're not really there to write the rules and enforce things. They don't have any, like rapid reaction force that's going to come in and make sure everything does as it says. Instead, it's really more of a dialogue. It's an ongoing conversation, and so these people get to know each other. They'll meet here. In 2 months, they'll have another meeting, etc. But fascinating because APEC, of course, is a puzzle for some. It is Asia Pacific in terms of what its title is, but it has some countries that are as well in the Pacific Islands. I always remind people it's got a few Latin Americans thrown in there for good measure. Chile, Mexico, and Peru, who see themselves very much as Pacific nations. But at the end of the day, you're talking about the big United States, Russia, China, and all the other key players, and here trying to foster cooperation, coordination of a range of issues. And at the end of the day, too, you have a conference and you have people coming together, but some of it is just the formalities and the sort of give and take that goes on. Again, Danika, I like how you describe, just managing different people, which I think is a challenge. I mean, maybe another angle I would take is this. I mean, as you see the kind of things that are going on, and you described how it was similar to perhaps the other conferences you saw, what would you describe are some of the skills and either, competencies, or what are the tools that people need to work in these kind of worlds? What would be examples?
First of all, patience.
Patience, yes.
And multitasking, a lot of
Yes.
multitasking, and you need to be organized in some way, like whatever suits best for you.
Yes.
And you need very attention to detail is
Yes.
crucial in my opinion, because if you mess something up with this person, then it's a chain reaction. So I've been to other conferences on a ministerial level back home, and I think they put a tiny bit more of detail into them because, of course, it's ministerial level, but everything is important as to the food you serve, just what kind of outfit are you going to wear, and it's...
Absolutely, no, and especially when you're dealing with these multilateral type organizations, rather if it was just private companies coming together, there's a certain business environment, let's say, but you have to deal very carefully with issues of protocol, issues of cultural sensitivity, and have your radar on, or what matters to certain people or individuals. I also like this notion of the multitasking, because at the end of the day, to pull these things off, I mean, you have the key leaders that might come in, or the top people, but in fact, this working group is really more the people that are rolling up their sleeves, so to speak, and working out details. And to make that possible, you have to have a lot of people who are behind the scenes kind of doing everything. And people don't always see that going on, right? Now, what about yourself, Megan? What kind of skills and competencies and otherwise maybe characteristics, what makes things like this work well or not work well? Or
I think to build off of what Danika said, we did mention of how certain volunteers were really go-getters and took initiative. I think in this kind of environment, that's really important. Like the people who have yet to develop that skill and are a little bit more timid, they're not going to be able to make the connections and get the opportunities and get involved. And networking is such a big part of this field, especially when you're first starting out and you don't have those connections yet. So I think that finding whatever inner voices that says that you can go and make those big steps and talk to people who might intimidate you a little bit. I think that kind of social skill is really important. I think this multitasking organization thing is really important, especially if you find yourself in a leadership position, because you are keeping track of multiple people and their schedules and what their skill sets are. So it's not even just managing your own skill set, you're going to have to be aware of.
Because ultimately it will fall on you, and if something doesn't happen, you might find yourself responsible. I think this could be said, I think in general, a leadership trait that you got to make sure the job gets done, and whether it means having to persuade others to help you or find the right people, that's one of the big challenges. But fascinating, and you think carefully back about your own your own upbringings and your own whether it's values that you've gotten over time or things you've learned in school about people and places. I mean, one thing particularly with this sort of multilateralism is understanding culture. I mean, in what ways would you say that this is vital? Are there any sort of things you have to be very careful to avoid, or what would you say about that?
Yeah, I would say that one thing I'm personally very particular of, because I'm a vegetarian, and that's one thing that points me towards it is food.
Yes.
Like, with Muslims, you can't serve pork. It's insulting to them, and it's a bad representation of you. It's like, oh, we don't care. That to the conferences I've been, we've been always very mindful of that, so that everything is labeled, and I think it's. You learn these things. You learn over time, because we both come from small towns, and with us it was a huge thing when the Bosnian War happened. When we got classmates from Bosnia, that was a.
They were in many cases Muslim. That hadn't been part of your immediate life. Right?
That was the first cultural experience, or just a couple of people in the class who were Orthodox and not Catholic. Those were my first experience. But as you go along, you travel more and just discover, and I think it's a skill that's learned, not.
I was curious to ask that. I mean, are there, and yet certain things, I mean, as you have just now effectively managed a lot of different people, you know, you look at some and you realize there are people who are quick learners who seem to be motivated and driven, and there are others who just don't, and yet can that person learn? Well, you know, some optimists would say yes, taught the right way, they're, you know, over time, and yet, you know, especially at the moment when you need something, you'd want somebody to be able to do it immediately. Anything else you might share just about, again, particularly the role of culture, the importance of culture when you're bringing together people from different parts of the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the cultural aspect is really important. Both time in Tanzania, and I was on a field learning experience in Kosovo and Serbia, and this idea that in both those places you have both Christian and Muslim populations working together, and we had that situation at APEC conference too, people from Malaysia and everything like that, and so, you know, dressing fairly demurely, even like you don't have to wear a headscarf or anything like that, but it is courteous to the other delegates who are from more conservative cultures, you know.
To not summon the hot shorts.
Well, even just something like keeping your shoulders covered, like or making sure that your skirt or something is to your knee. And then the food thing is really interesting because the last conference I was at in Taiwan, the vegetarian issue was actually a problem, even though it was different representatives from countries that do eat a lot of vegetarian food. So we had Indians and like other different individuals, and so, you know, kind of thinking you would have been like, of course we should have a vegetarian option. But I think often, especially countries like the United States where there isn't such a big vegetarian population, or that the meat is such a big part of diet or whatever, you overlook things like that, and then you end up isolating, you know, the two people who may be kind of important, you know.
Well, it's so true, and food, it's a fascinating thing. We actually teach a course at the undergraduate level from our anthropology called The Anthropology of Food. And it's not just let's have samples and try food, it's really how important food is in different cultures, and not just something that you eat. Of course, we need nourishment, but it really reflects both the values and the importance, and it's a very important social function too. And in these kind of meetings, you know, the right protocol, the right meetings, and making sure that the food is carefully thought about, right, becomes critical. And certainly as you are both, you know, becoming very culturally nuanced and savvy and understanding these things, you know, food is also a gateway into understanding what's important to people and what matters to them. And you know, I think especially in these modern societies we live in, we just, you think of food as just something you stop and you eat in 10 seconds. Not ideal, even though we too often find ourselves doing that. It's the time, the preparation, the putting it together, and it's probably more important, the social part, especially in doing, whether it's business or diplomacy, you've got to stop to eat, and yet that's also a very critical time of sort of interaction that might happen. Well, this has all been very fascinating. I guess, you know, as we've kind of getting close to winding it down, I'm, you know, trying to step back to say, okay, what are these ultimately the skills and competencies you're developing, and I think you've fleshed them out so well. I mean, you've got to have a deep understanding of culture and perhaps the people you're talking with, and I'm curious if you might share very briefly, I mean, what are ways that strategies that you use to, you know, quickly come up to speed with somebody? Are there any sort of techniques or places that you've gone to learn about different cultures, different people? Anything come to mind?
I would say prepare in advance.
Do your homework, do a little research.
But still listen to people, because even though you might think, oh, this person is from X country and everybody, I don't know, enjoys this drink, but listen to people, what they have to say, and then go off of them, but prepare before. Definitely.
Very interesting, and I like that, because you, as much as you might prepare, ultimately even that person may be trying to kind of break out of their mold or be a little more, you know, whatever it might be. You've got to be a good listener. I think that's a skill that I think people don't realize, and it's looking for little cues, maybe in the body language or in, you know, the mood, or just sensing how people's energy is. What else might you add?
Yeah, I think that's important. I think the most successful places that I've gone in terms of feeling like I was being culturally sensitive, I did get a debriefing, you know, before I left about kind of what the general norms are. But then you have to be observant and open-minded when you go, because those aren't going to be typical. Tanzania is a really good example of that, because typically it's one of the countries where you eat with your hands and you eat with your right hand only. But because of modern time and globalization and McDonald's and like all sorts of things like that. There's a lot of silverware there now. There's different practices, so some people are eating with both hands, and so just kind of the when in Rome thing. Like if your guests are all eating with silverware or with chopsticks or with their
signal
hands,
that it's okay. Yeah. So having your antenna on your radar to kind of be aware is very critical, but as well do your homework. It'll really pay off and help you to avoid some embarrassing situations, some awkward situations, and this is very critical. These are the kind of skills that, again, I think you're already showing very clearly are vital as you move ahead and become continued professionals, how you work with other people. And this is the world, again, that we're seeing. The world is now coming together in ways that our parents and grandparents did not quite do, whether it's in the virtual, connecting us online through Skype or on the internet, but reality at the end of the day is you've got to meet people and see them and go places. It's not enough to just open a book and read about something. It's something different to go and smell it and feel it and see people. So it's been a fascinating conversation. I think reflecting on your experiences now. I mean, the world is now sort of in your hands. You've come a long way from your own individual small towns, and that's a story that, again, is everywhere again and again. Even some of the most famous globally connected people, you come from some place and your world opens up, and we live in a fascinating time where we have these connections expanding. I guess I'm wondering if, as we wind things down, if you have any other thoughts, just reflecting on your world and what you see, the challenges coming ahead. I mean, do you generally come with a very optimistic view that you see exciting opportunities, or you talked earlier about some of the weather changes here and there. Sometimes there's plenty of crazy things going on that can leave you a little depressed, but how do you make that balance? How do you stay optimistic and know that the future holds some good options for you?
Well, my force is basically, in a way, a bit pessimistic, because I have my goals set, and one of my goals is to work for the International Committee of the Red Cross, which, as we know, goes more into like conflict areas, but that is what keeps me going. To I want to help people. I don't want to. I want to be more hands-on, practical. I don't want to stand on the sidelines. I want to get in there.
No, and it's fair to say the world we're in will continually have challenges. There's going to be problems that we have to come together and work to solve, and even as we find better ways to do things, it's just the nature of this big world we're a part of, and the awareness that we have that there's always going to be opportunities. If anything, you should see it in terms of boundless opportunity that's going to be there. It's really, how do we better manage them? How do we help improve lives? How do we bring our skills to affect positive change? And in that sense, you can turn this, what could easily be a very dark, pessimistic, grim world, into, hey, there is a possibility. You might not change the entire world, but you can certainly affect change in some areas. And what about yourself? How do you come away from this?
I think that's something that I've been struggling with, especially as I've gotten more involved on the practical sides of things. In the policy world, things happen slowly. It's hard to get things passed and moved through and implemented and change people's minds and hearts. And I think that that's been discouraging, because you go into it like, I want to really help make a difference and make changes that will trickle down and affect people's lives in a very real way. And it's just, the reality is that it's really slow.
Yes.
But at the same time, having met professionals who actually work in the field and seeing, for the most part, they're optimistic. Like they, really believe in what they're doing and the kinds of goals they want to accomplish. And so knowing that the peers that you'll be working with all have that kind of go get it, make it happen attitude, even if in the long run it kind of feels slow. That's encouraging to me.
Wow, this is really great, and I want to really just thank both of you having this time to share and to reflect on your own journeys and the connections you've been making, and that will continue. We are out of time, and I just want to wrap things up and remind our viewers here. I'm Carlos Juarez, and this is Global Connections, part of the ThinkTech radio series. We've been talking here with Danika Menson of Slovenia and Megan Strausser from Pennsylvania, both here in Hawaii, and just becoming very competent global citizens, having lots of great connections and opportunities. I want to thank all of you for being here, and thank particularly our listeners for listening. ThinkTech will be back next week, as we always are, for the next show in our ThinkTech series. Please tune in again. If you'd like to get our daily emails, program advisories through social media, etc., thinktechhawaii.com is the link. And remember that we do broadcast live on the internet at 2 and at 4 every weekday. We've got a variety of shows that are streamed as well on stream.tv and on Spreaker.com. If you like those links, again, thinktechhawaii.com. Go there as well to our Facebook page and tell them you like us. And of course, I'll see you here next week for more of Global Connections. Aloha.